Welcome back, everybody. Let's have a look at another informal task here, a much shorter task this time around. So let's read this out. You have recently moved to a different house. Write a letter to an English-speaking friend. In your letter, explain why you have moved, describe the new house, and invite your friend to come and visit. So as you can see, this is a much shorter task than many of the other tasks that we're going to look at. Much shorter than most tasks, to be honest, in IELTS writing general training, task 1. But they do sometimes come up, so we need to know how to adapt to this specific kind of challenge. Because although it may look a little bit easier, because you don't have to cover quite as many task elements, there is the challenge of coming up with more ideas for ourselves. We're given less detail with which to work, so we have to use our imagination a little bit more. So we will go through all of the usual steps, however. So first of all, we're going to underline, highlight some keywords. Of course, this is not going to take as long as usual because it's a very short task, but we have recently moved to a different house. Nice and simple, really. And we're writing a letter to an English-speaking friend. We know they're English-speaking, but the friend part is important just for identifying the fact that it's an informal letter. And then we need to explain the reason for moving, so why we've moved. We need to describe the new house, so an element of description here. And then we need to invite the friend to come and visit the new house. So invite the friend to visit. It's very, very simple, really, these keywords here. It's important regardless, just to get into the habit of doing it. It's important that we still identify and underline or highlight those keywords just so that we get used to doing so. And then we can think about the plan. So we know it's an informal letter. We're writing to a friend. And if we can come up with a purpose, a general purpose for the letter, that would be good. There are a few different things going on here in the bullet points. You know, we've got an explanation, we've got a description, we've got an invitation. But the main purpose of the letter, I believe here, is to give news, to provide information. But in a very informal setting, to update a friend on new developments. So we're just going to say provide information here. That's the main purpose of the letter. Part of that information is the news itself, the fact that we've moved. Part of the information is the explanation behind it. Part of the information is a description of the new house. And then the invitation is slightly separate from that, but we can add it on to the end of the letter. So we just add that there just so that we stay on track. We know that we have a clear purpose and a clear tone, consistent. We will use the informal throughout. And then as usual, we're going to have a look at each of the main paragraphs. The first paragraph we'll leave for just the how are you, hope you're doing well, and maybe we'll also give the general purpose of the letter in that first sentence as well. We'll see how we get on with that. But in paragraph 2, we're going to explain why we've moved. So here is where we need to come up with some ideas of our own. I'm imagining, in this case, perhaps a new job means that we have had to move, or maybe our partner has got a new job and we're moving for them. So let's imagine partner, new job, and the new job, of course, will be in a different part of the country, and that's why they've had to move. So we could say different, like maybe let's say it's London. So maybe they're within commuting distance from London, but they don't want to have to do the commute all the time, so they just want to live closer to work. So those points will be fine. I can imagine I can easily turn those into some sentences later. Partner, new job, London. And then that's the explanation for the move. Now we get to describe the house, and here we need some nice descriptive language, some nice imagery. We can maybe compare it to the old house as well. That gives us the opportunity to use some comparative grammar. So let's imagine, first of all, a general description let's say that, I don't know, let's just say that it's a gorgeous, beautifully decorated house. A couple of adjectives here might be helpful, but you can probably think of them on the spot, to be honest. And let's say that it's smaller than our current place, probably because it's London, so you can't afford quite as much. Places tend to be more expensive there. So it's smaller, but let's say what's around the house. Maybe we can describe the area of the house. Let's say that there's a lovely park on the doorstep, which is sort of idiomatic language here, which is important for the informal tone. It's not literally on the doorstep, of course, but we use that idiomatically, colloquially, to mean that it's very near to us. There's a park on our doorstep. That's fine for now, I think. Then we can move on to inviting the friend to come to visit. Let's give some pointers here. How about we come up with a date, or at least a month, let's say December. And then how can the person visiting us maybe link it to the house somehow? Let's say that there is a sofa bed in the living room. So we're linking it back to the main topic, which is the new house. And because it's December, what can they do together? Well, because it's December, we can imagine, let's say, the Christmas markets that we can go and visit, and maybe ice skating or whatever. That should be enough there for ideas. We'll turn them into some sentences in a moment. That's fine, so we'll leave that plan on the side here, and let's get started with the letter itself. It's an informal letter, so we'll just go straight to a first name. You may even be able to do a short form of a name. I'm going to use the name Sarah here, and of course, as long as it's not a full name or not a Mr. someone, Mrs. someone, that's fine. Let's go into that introductory sentence, often a purpose sentence, sometimes just a hope you are well sentence, and let's go with something just like that. So this is a nice way. I've used a few different openings before, now that we've had a look at a few videos already, but this is another nice way. I hope all is well with you. Hope all is well with you. Notice we're omitting the subject I. We've talked about this before, but only do this in an informal setting, ideally. All, instead of everything, that would also be fine. Hope everything is well with you. Hope all is well with you. Notice the question mark at the end. It invites a response. We want to hear back from the recipient, so we add that question mark there. We don't assume everything is well, but we hope it is, so there's that idea of a question at the end of it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually add the purpose onto the end of this sentence here by using something we've seen before, just writing to let you know. This is one of those expressions that I recommend you memorize really for informal letters. We use it a lot, just writing to let you know. And as I say, this purpose here is providing information. That sounds very formal. In an informal way, letting people know news. Letting people know some important news in this case, or let's make it even more informal, some pretty big news. So we would never see this in a formal setting, but in an informal setting, in a colloquial tone, this is absolutely okay. Some pretty big news. Notice the punctuation I'm going to use here. I'm going to use a colon to then introduce what that news is without starting a new sentence. And we're going to keep a very short bit of language here. Just that. We've moved. And notice how I'm using the subject we rather than I. You can do I if that's what you're going to focus on, but I know that I'm going to be talking about my partner in a moment, so I'm imagining that I'm writing as a unit, two people together. So we're just writing to let you know some pretty big news. We've moved. Notice the contraction as well, not we have, but we've, and notice the exclamation mark because you're delivering surprising information, and you're also including that like a little bit of lightness in the letter as well. It's exciting, you're happy, you communicate that through the use of the exclamation mark. And then we can move into the actual purposes themselves. Part of the reason that I'm putting the purpose up here is that I feel like it's better separated from the explanation. It's like, this is what's happened, that's one paragraph, and then this is why it's happened is a separate paragraph. You could probably get away with putting this in the next paragraph, but I think it looks better up here next to the hope all is well with you, this is why I'm writing. So let's move into the second paragraph here, and we are looking at explaining why we've moved. So we have got this idea about our partner having a new job. Now, because we're writing to a friend, let's imagine, you've got to imagine that you have shared knowledge, you have shared experience. And because of that, you could probably imagine that you mentioned the job or the possibility of a job to the friend in the past. And so then we can write something like this. Let's go with a name here, and we don't need to explain who Tom is because, of course, our friend knows who it is. So it's that shared knowledge. Let's imagine it's Tom, I'm writing on behalf of the woman here, had an interview with a company, business, let's go with a firm as another word, firm up in London. Notice the preposition here. We often do this a lot in English. We might say down in London, up in London, wherever you are in the country. Ideally, if you're south, you would say up, and if you were north, you would say down, but people don't always get that right. But yeah, it's a bit more casual with a firm up in London. Let's just end that here. And notice the question mark I'm adding. It's like, I think I told you. I'm not absolutely sure, but I think I told you. So it's got that sound to the sentence, and so it becomes a question. So we can add that question mark there. I think I told you that Tom had an interview with a firm up in London. Okay, then let's talk about what happened as a result of that interview. So it, and some nice colloquial language, a nice phrasal verb. It turned out that. Turned out. So the result of this interview was that. So a result of a cause. So it turned out that the company, not writing the firm again, we can show our range of vocabulary, turned out that the company thought he was, and now let's use some nice idiomatic vocabulary here, the perfect fit. So he was the perfect candidate for that position. That sounds very formal. We'll go with the perfect fit. And offered him the job. Again, appropriate vocabulary here. And notice that offered is following on from they thought, that the company, so the company thought, the company offered. Company offered him the job. More idiomatic vocabulary. On the spot. And again, punctuation, we'll add an exclamation mark here because again, it's surprise, it's happiness, it's joy. So we're trying to express that through the punctuation mark there. So they offered him the job on the spot. Okay, great. That sounds awesome. So now we come to the explanation of the move. Let's frame it in terms of a problem. Originally it was a problem. They already have a house. Maybe they didn't originally plan on moving. So the only problem was that, and notice the tenses here as well. We're looking at the past. However, although we're looking at the past, we're imagining a future problem from the viewpoint of the past, if that makes sense. So you can imagine back in the past we had this problem, and to us at the time it was in the future, but now to us in the present also that future is in the past. But what we do is we say the problem was in the past, this was the problem, and from that position this would have been the problem. So this would have been, let's say, the commute would have been 2 hours from where we were. So it's a problem for the future realized from the past, but this future problem is according to that past, not this present. So they're both in the past, but one is further back than the other. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm putting myself across well there. So from where we were. So the only problem was that the commute would have been 2 hours from where we were. So basically a therefore if we were in a formal letter, and this is really explaining, now we're coming to the explanation of why we're moving. So we thought it's best to find a place, and instead of in London, how can we paraphrase that? We can say in the capital. We won't say the capital of England, we just say the capital. A nice way of paraphrasing that. Now, something you might notice is that it maybe seems like there's something missing between it and best. That looks a little bit strange perhaps to you. So again, this is informal colloquial language, I suppose here, where we're choosing to omit language that's not necessarily necessary. So we thought it would be best, but we don't actually need to include that if we are writing in an informal style. So we thought it best to find a place in the capital. Okay, we can now move on to describing the new house. And I'm going to try to create a nice transition here from the previous paragraph, but it might look a little bit strange initially. I'm going to start with an and. And I'm so glad we did. So you can see the transition. We're linking it very clearly with the previous paragraph by linking it to the previous sentence. We thought it was best to find a new place in the capital. I'm glad we did that. I'm glad we found this new place because the house is, here's my adjective down there, gorgeous. The house is gorgeous. Now, although that might look a little bit strange, starting a paragraph, let alone a sentence, with and, which seems to suggest that it should be running on in the same paragraph. The two points are actually quite different. You can see that we've moved from the explanation to a description of the house, but we've also combined it with a reason that we're happy. So the two sentences here are linked, and we've linked them with an and with a because really, but they're also separate enough in purpose that it makes sense to split the paragraphs. If you think that this is a bit risky, starting a paragraph with an and, don't feel like you have to do it. In this case, it does improve the paragraph because it creates that sense of coherence and cohesion, but you need to make your own judgment call on whether you think it's the right time or the right place to do something like that. And I'm so glad we did because the house is gorgeous. Okay, let's go on to the next sentence. Let's explain how it's gorgeous. Notice the contraction, it is, it's beautifully decorated and more house vocabulary, furnished, slightly different decoration. Of course will be, the wallpaper, the general design, the floors, the furnishings, or how it's furnished is more about what you put in the rooms. So it's beautifully decorated and furnished, and let's bring in that idea about the park now. And because it's slightly a different point, let's add that comma. And there's a, let's bring in an adjective, nice and simple one, a lovely park right on our doorstep. Remember, that doesn't mean it's literally on the doorstep, it just means it's very, very close to the house. So idiomatic expression, idiomatic use of the preposition there. Okay, then we're going to come to the idea that it's small. Now, that seems to suggest a bit of a contrast with how happy we are. People usually want to move into larger places, or at least the same size. So we're going to create this idea that maybe we're not so happy about this part. So we're going to use this word here, admittedly, and we use the comma. But admittedly, we have to admit, unfortunately, despite all of these great things, here is a bad thing. So you create that sense of contrast after you've talked about something very positive. You then move to one maybe small negative, and you use admittedly. We have to accept this. So admittedly, it's much smaller. So nice, simple comparative grammar, but it's important for the grammatical range. It's much smaller than the house we had before. It's much smaller than the house we had before. And here's some nice language. As we said before, we expect to get a smaller place for the same money in London because London's very expensive. And a way that we can communicate that is with "that's the thing for you." We can use it with places, we can use it with people. Oh yeah, well of course that's Graham for you. He's always doing stuff like that. It basically just means this is what we know to expect from this place, this person, this thing. And hopefully you've also noticed here we have ellipsis, so these 3 full stops, which just sort of communicates that you can finish the idea of the sentence yourself. This idea that, oh yes, of course, that's London. So we can end that paragraph there, and we can move on to the invitation. Now this is a little bit different. I don't really feel that there is a smooth transition we can make here on top of what we had before with an and. You probably could. You might be able to say, well, now that we've moved, do you want to come to visit? That would be okay. I'm just going to go with, do you have any plans for December, as I've put down in the plan that we want to talk about December. Do you have any plans for December? And a really nice way to put out an invitation, why don't you? Why don't you do this? Why don't you come down and visit? You can just write come and visit, come down and visit, maybe suggest that this friend is living further north. Why don't you come down and visit if you have a free weekend in December? We don't need to write that, it's implied. So why don't you come down and visit if you have a free weekend? Don't forget the question mark, same with the previous sentence as well. And notice that we're again introducing some conditional grammar. We've got the if in there. And then let's bring in the next idea. So there is contraction, and notice the do not contraction, don't. There's a sofa bed in the living room. So some pretty basic house vocabulary, but it's important in a topic like this that you're able to show your awareness of it. You might say the spare room, the living room, the second bedroom, wherever you have it. Which is, now notice here I'm using a non-defining relative clause to give some more information about the sofa bed itself. And let's use an adverb and an adjective. Surprisingly and comfortable, we might write comfortable. What's a shorter form of comfortable? It's a little bit more casual. You can only use it for furnishings really, like beds or sofas or chairs. Comfy, which is surprisingly comfy. So it's a little bit more informal, but nice that we have the grammar variety and showing off a little bit of vocabulary as well. Okay, let's close off this paragraph with one more sentence, maybe one or two more sentences. Let's say we'll, so we will, the two of us together, to mean both myself and the person I'm writing to. So this Sarah here, together we'll visit the Christmas markets, as I've written in the plan. And we might say go ice skating. That's okay. Let's make it a little bit more colloquial, a little bit more chatty. This is quite nice to do. Do a bit of ice skating. Do a bit of ice skating. Do a bit of shopping. Do a bit of wandering around, do a bit of hiking, whatever it is. It sounds much more colloquial, much more informal, chatty, conversational, relaxed. And then I know I've used a few of these already, but I'm going to add another one here, an exclamation mark again to emphasize that this is a great idea and I'm really happy about the idea that we might do this together. And then we'll close it off with a let me know what you think, which invites a response. Again, we've already written a couple of things that invite a response, but we want to say that we want to hear the recipient's ideas or their feedback, really. We're not forcing them to go to the Christmas market, so we want to hear that they're okay with that idea. And then we'll close it off with a typical informal salutation, love, let's go with Jane. Or you might say something like best wishes, whatever you think is appropriate there. But remember, it's an informal letter, so ideally not a best regards or yours sincerely or anything like that. And there we go. Hopefully you found this one useful. As you can see, we've got a nice mixture of grammar here, so a good range of vocabulary. We've stuck very closely to the topic of new house vocabulary. We've got some nice transitions between the sentences and between the paragraphs to improve that coherence and cohesion score. And we've come up with a nice range of ideas as well, which is often the challenge when we have a more of a limited task there. But the nice thing is that we have less to cover, and so it's quite clear that we've covered all of the task elements in this particular question. As always, if you have any questions, please leave them in the Q&A section. I'll leave you to do the gap fill exercise now, and then I'll see you in the next lecture.